I'll be your maid. Cook anything." A black obese maid begged the millionaire at midnight. At the stroke of midnight, a desperate maid stands outside a mansion's golden gates. Tears stream down her face as she pleads, "I'll be your maid. Cook anything." But this isn't just any mansion. It belongs to a millionaire whose world is built on power, pride, and secrets. What begins as a cry for survival quickly twists into something no one could have imagined. Why does her voice shake as if she's hiding more than hunger? Why does the millionaire, known for turning everyone away, freeze at the sight of her? Whispers of betrayal, buried pasts, and a dangerous truth stir in the shadows of his perfect life. She isn't just begging for a job, she may be the key to unraveling everything he thought he knew. So, what happens when a midnight bargain breaks open the walls of wealth and shame? And will her plea for mercy turn into the one thing that could destroy them both? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Winter's bitter wind whipped through the small Colorado mining town, carrying snowflakes that stung like tiny needles. The crowd huddled around Sheriff Dunn's wooden platform, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 4 children stood trembling on the rough planks, their thin clothes offering little protection against the mountain cold. The eldest, a girl of 12, stood straight-backed despite her circumstances. Her dark eyes held a quiet dignity, and her fingers absently traced patterns in the air as if playing an invisible instrument. Behind her, 2 boys 9 and 7 years old pressed close together, their faces dirty but defiant. The smallest, a toddler of just 3 years, clung to his sister's skirts, thumb firmly planted in his mouth. $5, slurred their current guardian, a man whose whiskey-reddened face showed no trace of shame. "That's all I'm asking for the lot." From the edge of the crowd, Harlan Briggs watched with growing disgust. His weathered face, lined by years of mountain solitude, darkened as he heard the townspeople's whispers. 4 mouths to feed, in winter? They'll eat you out of house and home. Too much trouble, if you ask me. Harlan's calloused hand brushed against the $5 in his pocket money meant for supplies. He hadn't spoken more than 10 words to another soul in months, preferring the quiet of his mountain cabin to the company of others. Not since Sarah. He pushed away the memory of his wife's face, of the tiny bundle that had never drawn breath. Sheriff Dunn cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Anyone willing to take these children in? They need a home, folks." The crowd shuffled, eyes dropping to the ground. The little one began to whimper. $5. Harlan's gruff voice cut through the silence. Every head turned toward him, shock evident on their faces. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the packed snow. "Well, if it ain't the mountain hermit," someone sneered. "Finally decided to rejoin civilization?" Harlan ignored them, pulling out his wrinkled bills. The children watched him with wary eyes as he handed the money to the sheriff. Their former guardian snatched it away, already turning toward the saloon. "You're making a mistake, Briggs," Sheriff Dunn said quietly. 4 children is a big responsibility for a man alone. "Better than leaving them here," Harlan growled, gesturing for the children to follow him to his wagon. The eldest girl helped her little brother down from the platform while the other 2 scrambled after. Harlan lifted the toddler, feeling how light the child was, and settled him in the wagon's bed among the blankets he used for trading. "He'll be bringing them back before spring," a woman's shrill voice called out. "Mark my words, if they survive the winter," another added with a harsh laugh. Harlan climbed onto the wagon seat, taking up the reins. The 4 children huddled together under the blankets, their faces a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Without a word, he flicked the reins, and the horses started forward, leaving the jeering crowd behind as they headed toward the snowy mountain road that led home. The wagon creaked and swayed as Harlan guided the horses up the narrow mountain trail. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes catching in the horses' manes and coating the children's blanket. The 4 small passengers huddled closer together in the wagon bed, their breaths coming out in visible puffs in the frigid air. Clara pulled the thin wool blanket tighter around her brother's shoulders, trying to shield the littlest one from the biting wind. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she stayed silent. They all did. None of them dared speak to the broad-shouldered stranger who'd bought them like cattle at market. The trail wound higher into the mountains, through stands of snow-laden pines. Just when Clara thought they couldn't possibly go any further into the wilderness, a clearing appeared. A log cabin stood solid against the white landscape, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A small barn sat off to one side, and stacked firewood lined the cabin's western wall. Harlan pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. He helped them out one by one, his large hands gentle despite their roughness. The toddler whimpered from the cold, and Clara quickly scooped him up. "Inside," Harlan said gruffly, nodding toward the cabin door. They followed him up the worn wooden steps. The door creaked open to reveal a single room, warm from the blazing fireplace. A ladder led to a small loft above, and simple furnishings filled the space. A table with 4 chairs, a cupboard, a bed in one corner, and a rocking chair beside the hearth. Clara's eyes were drawn to that rocker. It was beautifully carved, with delicate flowers trailing up its arms and initials worked into the headrest. "S.B. Sit," Harlan instructed, gesturing to the table. He moved to the fireplace where an iron pot hung, steam rising from its contents. The rich smell of meat and vegetables made their mouths water. One by one, he filled wooden bowls with venison stew, placing them before the children, along with thick slices of cornbread. Clara helped the littlest one eat, but her own hands shook as she spooned up the hot food, their first real meal in days. Harlan ate standing by the fire, watching them with an unreadable expression. Above the fireplace mantel, Clara noticed a well-worn Bible, its leather cover cracked with age. When they finished eating, Harlan gathered blankets from a trunk and laid them near the hearth. The children settled onto their makeshift beds, the warmth of the fire and full bellies making their eyes heavy. Clara tucked her siblings in, smoothing their hair and whispering gentle reassurances. As the fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls, she leaned close to them and whispered, "Maybe God hasn't forgotten us after all." Dawn crept through the frost-covered windows of the cabin, painting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. Harlan stirred from his bed, muscles stiff from another night of fitful sleep. He glanced at the heap of blankets near the hearth where the 4 children lay tangled together, their breaths soft and steady in the quiet morning. Moving quietly, he stoked the dying embers and added fresh logs to the fire. The familiar routine of morning chores felt different now, weighted with the presence of these unexpected guests. He pulled out his cast-iron skillet and began mixing flapjack batter, adding strips of bacon to another pan. The sizzle and pop of cooking bacon roused the children. One by one, tousled heads emerged from the blankets, noses twitching at the unfamiliar smell of a proper breakfast. The youngest, one rubbed his eyes with tiny fists, while his brothers sat up straighter, trying to hide their eagerness. "Might as well tell me your names," Harlan said, flipping a flapjack. "Can't keep calling you hey you." The eldest girl smoothed her wrinkled dress. "I'm Clara," she said softly. "These are my brothers. Matthew is 9, James is 7, and little Thomas is 3. Harlan nodded, not meeting their eyes. "Harlan Briggs. Most folks just call me Briggs." He served up plates of steaming flapjacks and bacon, watching as the children tried to remember their manners despite their hunger. Little Thomas struggled with his fork until Clara cut his food into tiny pieces. "Boys," Harlan said, addressing Matthew and James, "after breakfast, you'll fetch wood and water. Stack's getting low, and the barrel needs filling." They straightened up, eager to prove themselves useful. Clara stood and brushed crumbs from her skirt. "I can sweep and help clean up, Mr. Briggs. I'm good at keeping house." Harlan grunted his approval and went to fetch the broom from beside the door. Behind him, there was a loud clatter, followed by a cloud of white dust. He spun around to find Thomas covered head to toe in flour, the sack overturned beside him. The toddler's face crumpled at Harlan's thunderous expression. "Damn it all!" Harlan snapped, then immediately regretted it as all 4 children flinched. The little one's lip trembled. "No, I'm sorry. Not used to little ones about. We'll clean it up together." The day passed in a blur of chores and adjustments. The boys proved eager workers, if inexperienced, and Clara moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency. As night fell, snow began drifting down outside the windows, and the wind picked up its mournful song. Clara settled into the rocking chair with Thomas, who was fighting sleep. As she rocked, she began to hum softly, a sweet, simple melody that filled the quiet cabin. Harlan, who had been banking the fire for the night, went absolutely still. The tune wrapped around him like a ghost's embrace, the very lullaby Sarah had sung during her pregnancy, the one she'd promised to sing to their child. The last notes of Clara's song faded into the crackling of the fire. Harlan's knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his chair, his weathered face a mask of raw emotion. The familiar melody had pierced straight through the walls he'd built around his heart over the years. "That song," he said, his voice rough. "Where did you learn it?" Clara looked up from where Thomas had finally dozed off in her arms, surprise crossing her young face. "My mama taught it to me, Mr. Briggs. She said it was an old hymn from back home in Tennessee. Sweet Hour of Prayer, she called it." Harlan's breath caught in his throat. "Tennessee, you say?" "Yes, sir. Mama used to sing it every night before bed. Said her mama sang it to her too." Clara's fingers absently stroked Thomas's hair as she spoke. "My Sarah." Harlan paused, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "My wife, she was from Tennessee too. Used to sing that very hymn while she rocked in that chair you're sitting in." Clara's eyes widened as she glanced down at the carved initials on the rocker's arm. "Is that why these letters are here? S.B. Sarah Briggs," he nodded, something in his chest loosening just slightly. A loud clatter from the door interrupted the moment. Matthew and James burst in from their last trip to the outhouse, their boots caked with mud and snow. They chased each other across the clean-swept floor, leaving dirty tracks in their wake. Harlan felt his temper rise, a harsh word forming on his lips. But then, Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, clear as yesterday. "Gentleness goes further than thunder, my love." She'd always said that when his temper got the best of him. Taking a deep breath, Harlan stood slowly. "Boys," he said, keeping his voice steady, "let's have a lesson about boots and clean floors." The brothers froze, expecting anger, but found Harlan already reaching for a rag. "Watch here," he demonstrated, showing them how to knock the snow off outside and wipe their boots clean. "Your sister worked hard on that floor today." Later, with the children settled into their blankets by the hearth, Harlan lay on his cot in the corner. The cabin's familiar creaks and groans mixed with the soft breathing of four small bodies. His eyes traced the rough-hewn rafters above, while Sarah's beloved hymn played over and over in his mind. Each note seemed to chip away at something frozen inside him, something that had been cold for far too long. A week melted into routine at Harlan's mountain cabin. The early morning sun found Clara teaching little Thomas to scatter corn for the chickens, his tiny hands gleefully tossing feed while the hens clucked around their feet. Matthew and James had taken to splitting kindling with surprising enthusiasm, though Harlan kept a watchful eye on their axe work from the chopping block where he tackled the larger logs. Inside, Clara's needle flashed in the firelight each evening, mending torn shirts and patching worn trousers. Her stitches grew neater with practice, reminding Harlan of Sarah's careful handiwork. He'd catch himself watching the children at times, a warmth growing in his chest that both comforted and unsettled him. Still, he kept his words gruff and his manner stern, though his hand would sometimes rest gently on Thomas's head or squeeze Matthew's shoulder in quiet approval. As night fell each evening, Clara's sweet voice filled the cabin with hymns. Thomas, who often grew fussy at bedtime, would calm instantly at the sound of his sister's singing. Harlan found himself lingering over his evening tasks, just to listen. The trip into town for supplies came too soon for Harlan's liking. He'd grown used to their mountain solitude. Clara helped him load the wagon while the boys entertained Thomas, and soon they were bumping down the snowy trail toward the settlement. Outside the general store, several townsfolk gathered, their whispers following Harlan and the children like shadows. "There goes Briggs with his bought brats," one man sneered loud enough to hear. Harlan's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. Tom Webster, a mean-spirited miner who'd lost his claim the previous summer, stepped into their path. His eyes fixed on Clara with cruel intent. "Ain't worth the $5 you paid, Briggs. Worthless, just like her mama was." Harlan's fists clenched at his sides. The old rage rose in his throat, hot and familiar. But Clara's small hand slipped into his, steady and cool, and he swallowed back the violence. "Come along, children," he said instead, his voice low but firm. Still, Webster's words left a mark, like a bruise on his heart. As they loaded supplies, Harlan caught fragments of conversation between the storekeep and a weather-worn rancher. Worst storm in years coming. Barometer dropping. Better stock up. Their worried tones made his spine tingle with familiar dread. Back at the cabin, Harlan worked with fierce determination, stacking cord after cord of firewood against the cabin's walls. Dark clouds were gathering over the mountains, heavy with threat. His hands moved automatically while his mind raced through preparations needed. "Lord," he whispered, the words strange and rusty in his mouth after so many silent years. "Lord, help us weather what's coming." He paused, startled by his own prayer, then continued stacking wood as the wind began to rise. The wind's angry howl rattled the cabin windows, its fierce gusts sending waves of snow against the log walls with a sound like soft thunder. Inside, the fire's warmth barely reached the corners of the room, where frost crept along the edges of the glass panes. "We'll need to make the food last," Harlan announced, carefully dividing their morning porridge into 5 small portions. "Can't tell how long this storm might hold." The children nodded solemnly, understanding in their eyes that spoke of past hunger. Clara wrapped a blanket around Thomas's shoulders as they huddled near the fireplace. The little one shivered despite the heat, pressing close to his sister's side. Matthew and James sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the flames dance with worried expressions. Harlan rummaged in an old chest, pulling out some smooth pine blocks and his whittling knife. "Here, boys," he said, settling onto his chair. "Let me show you something useful." He demonstrated how to hold the knife safely, carefully scraping away at the wood to reveal the shape of a small horse within. Matthew's eyes lit up with interest, and James leaned forward eagerly. Harlan gave each boy a piece of wood and a small knife, guiding their hands with unexpected gentleness. "Slow and steady," he reminded them. "Always cut away from yourself." The quiet afternoon work was shattered by a tremendous crack from outside, followed by the ground-shaking thud of a falling tree. Thomas burst into tears, while James dropped his whittling and grabbed Matthew's arm. The wind seemed to howl even louder, as if celebrating its destruction. "Hush now," Clara said softly, gathering Thomas into her lap. Her clear voice rose above the storm's rage, singing the familiar hymn that had become their comfort. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The toddler's sobs quieted as he pressed his face against her shoulder, and even Harlan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as the sweet notes filled the cabin. But the storm's fury only increased as darkness fell. The wind found every crack and crevice, its moaning like a wild thing trying to break in. Harlan paced from window to window, checking the shutters, adding logs to the fire, his face growing more troubled with each gust. "Mr. Briggs?" Clara's quiet voice made him turn. "Are you afraid?" Harlan's first instinct was to deny it, but something in her steady gaze made him honest. "Not exactly afraid," he said slowly. "But I haven't felt this helpless in years. Used to pray, in times like this. Haven't done that since Sarah." He trailed off, the name of his late wife hanging in the air between them. "Maybe," Clara suggested gently. "It's time to try again?" Harlan stood still for a long moment, then nodded. Awkwardly, he lowered himself to his knees beside the children near the fire. Thomas crawled into his lap without hesitation, while Clara took his rough hand in her small one. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. "It's been a long time." Morning light crept through the frost-covered windows, revealing a world transformed into white. The storm had passed, leaving behind drifts that reached halfway up the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, its warmth a blessed contrast to the bitter cold outside. Harlan stood at the window, studying the snow-locked landscape. "Got to keep the woodpile stocked," he muttered, more to himself than the others. "Storm might not be done with us yet." After breakfast, he led Matthew and James outside, where they worked to dig a path to the woodpile. The boys watched in fascination as Harlan's axe split log after log with practiced swings. Sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the cold, and his sleeve rode up, revealing a long, jagged scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. "What happened to your arm, Mr. Briggs?" Matthew asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Harlan paused mid-swing, looking down at the old wound. "Got this in the war," he said quietly. "Cavalry charge near Richmond. Horse went down, and a Confederate saber caught me." He ran his fingers along the scar's rough edge. "Was in the hospital tent for weeks after that." James picked up a split log, struggling under its weight. "Is that why you live up here all alone?" The question hung in the crisp mountain air. Harlan's shoulders tensed, then slumped slightly. Clara, who had come to the doorway with Thomas on her hip, stood silently listening. "No," Harlan said finally, his voice rough. "That came later." He set down his axe, brushing snow from a nearby stump before sitting heavily. "Had a wife, Sarah. She was." He swallowed hard. "She was everything good in my life. We were going to have a baby." The children waited, sensing the weight of his words. Even little Thomas seemed to understand the need for quiet. "There were complications," Harlan continued, staring at his calloused hands. "The doctor tried, but I lost them both that night. The baby, she never even drew her first breath." His voice cracked. "I couldn't understand why God would let that happen. Still can't, some days. Haven't set foot in a church since." Clara stepped forward, snow crunching beneath her feet. "But maybe," she said softly, her voice gentle as a snowflake, "He sent us to you instead." Harlan's head snapped up, meeting her steady gaze. Something shifted in his weathered face, surprise, pain, and perhaps a glimmer of hope all mingled together. That evening, as the last light faded from the sky, Harlan carried a sleeping Thomas to the makeshift bed near the fireplace. The toddler's small hand curled trustingly around Harlan's finger as he tucked the blankets around the tiny form. For a long moment, he stood there, watching the peaceful rise and fall of the child's chest, Clara's words echoing in his mind like a prayer. The morning sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, warming the snow-laden landscape. After days of being trapped by the blizzard, the path down the mountain had cleared enough for travel. Harlan hitched up his horses to the old wooden sled, its runners gleaming with fresh metal strips he'd attached for better grip. "Clara, Matthew, you're coming with me," Harlan called out, adjusting the horses' harnesses. "Need to check on supplies in town." He helped Clara up onto the sled bench, then lifted Matthew beside her, wrapping them both in thick wool blankets. The descent into town was slow and careful, the horses picking their way through snow drifts. Clara held tight to Matthew's hand, their breaths forming little clouds in the cold air. The town looked different under its white blanket, quieter, somehow more subdued. They pulled up outside the general store, where several townsfolk were already gathered, their faces drawn with worry. Inside, the usually well-stocked shelves looked sparse. Miss Etta stood behind the counter, her kind face creased with concern as she counted out portions of flour for a waiting customer. "Harlan Briggs," she called out warmly when they entered, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the children. "And these must be two of your new family members." She came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "My, how much better they look already. Some good mountain air and proper meals have done wonders." Clara smiled shyly while Matthew pressed closer to Harlan's side. From the corner of the store, several men watched with barely hidden sneers. "Heard you took in all 4 of them strays," one man muttered loud enough to be heard. "Lost your mind, did you, Briggs?" Miss Etta shot the man a sharp look. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Tom Wilson. Sometimes, he knows better than we do what a person needs." She turned back to Harlan. "You've done a good thing, taking those children in. Don't let anyone tell you different." As Harlan gathered what supplies remained on the shelves, a drunk stumbled through the door, bringing with him the sharp smell of whiskey. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Clara, and he lurched forward, reaching for her arm. "Pretty little thing," he slurred. "Remind me of your worthless mama." Before his fingers could touch her, Harlan moved with surprising speed. His hand shot out, catching the drunk's wrist in an iron grip. With one powerful shove, he sent the man stumbling backward into a barrel of dried beans. "You touch her," Harlan's voice was deadly quiet. "You'll answer to me." The drunk scrambled to his feet and fled, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the store. Clara stared up at Harlan, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, trust. The ride home was quiet, the loaded sled cutting through fresh snow. As they neared the cabin, Clara turned to Harlan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said softly. "You feel like a pa." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snowy yard, as Matthew and John worked diligently on their snow fort. Their small hands packed the white powder into blocks, building walls that reached their chests. Inside the warm cabin, the aroma of baking cornbread filled the air as Clara stood at the wooden counter, carefully measuring ingredients. "Like this?" she asked, showing Harlan the bowl of mixed cornmeal and buttermilk. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. "Just like that. Your mama taught you well." He reached past her to stoke the fire in the cookstove, making sure the temperature stayed even. Little Sarah toddled around their feet, clutching her wooden doll that Harlan had whittled during the storm. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the winter chill outside. Clara hummed softly as she worked, her movements sure and steady. When the cornbread was done, its golden brown crust perfect, Harlan helped her lift the heavy cast iron skillet. As darkness settled outside, the boys tumbled in, cheeks red from the cold and eyes bright with excitement. "Papa Harlan," Matthew called out, "come see our fort. We made it just like you showed us." The words Papa Harlan hung in the air, natural and unexpected. Clara watched as Harlan's hands stilled on the plates he was setting out. She saw him swallow hard, his throat working. Little Sarah, not to be outdone, pulled at his pant leg. Clara had been teaching her the words all afternoon while they baked. "Papa Har," she chirped, her tiny face beaming up at him. Harlan turned away quickly, but not before Clara caught the shimmer of tears in his eyes. He busied himself with lighting the lamp, his movements deliberately slow until he had mastered his emotions. They gathered around the table, the lamplight casting a warm glow over their faces. John told a funny story about Matthew falling into a snowdrift, and for the first time, real laughter echoed off the cabin walls. Even Harlan joined in, his deep chuckle mixing with the children's giggles. After the meal, as the fire crackled low, Clara began to hum the old hymn. Her clear voice lifted in the quiet cabin, singing of grace and hope. To her surprise, a deep baritone joined her, Harlan's voice, rough but true, harmonizing with hers as if they'd sung together for years. The younger children's eyes grew heavy as the melody continued. Sarah curled up in Harlan's lap, her thumb in her mouth. Matthew and John leaned against each other on their blankets near the hearth. Clara kept singing, her voice twining with Harlan's, until soft, steady breathing told her they had all drifted off to sleep. The crisp morning air bit at Harlan's face as he trudged through knee-deep snow, checking his trap lines in the high mountain passes. A week of relative peace with the children had settled into something like routine, but they needed meat for the coming weeks. His breath clouded in front of him as he adjusted the empty game bag on his shoulder. The sky darkened unexpectedly, and an ominous rumble echoed across the mountainside. Harlan's head snapped up, his years of mountain experience screaming danger. The sound grew louder, like a freight train bearing down. His eyes widened as he saw the wall of snow cascading down the slope above him. "Dear Lord," he whispered, breaking into a run. But the deep snow slowed his movements, making each step a battle. The avalanche caught him before he could reach the shelter of the trees. A crushing weight of white slammed into his back, tumbling him like a rag doll. Pain exploded in his right leg as it twisted against a hidden rock. When the snow settled, Harlan found himself half buried but alive. His legs screamed in agony as he dug himself out. Blood seeped through his torn trousers, and the limb wouldn't bear his full weight. The temperature was dropping fast. "Got to make it back," he muttered through gritted teeth. The children. The thought of them waiting at the cabin drove him forward. Using his rifle as a makeshift crutch, he began the grueling journey home. The trek that normally took 2 hours stretched into 4. Darkness crept in, and the cold penetrated deeper. Harlan's vision blurred, his wounded leg dragging uselessly now. Ice crystals formed in his beard. Finally, through the growing darkness, he spotted the warm glow of the cabin windows. "Papa Harlan." Clara's voice seemed to come from far away as he collapsed against the cabin door. The last thing he felt was small hands grabbing his coat before consciousness slipped away. He drifted in and out of awareness. Clara's voice directed her brothers. "Matthew, John, help me get him to his bed. Sarah, bring more blankets." The children somehow managed to drag him inside, though he was twice their size. Through his fever, he felt Clara's cool hands on his forehead. She used the herbal knowledge Miss Etta had shared, making poultices for his leg and brewing willow bark tea for the pain. "Just like Miss Etta showed me," she whispered, changing the dressings. Their supplies dwindled as the days blurred together. Harlan's fever raged, his skin burning even as he shivered uncontrollably. The children rationed what little food remained, giving him the larger portions despite his weak protests. That night, Clara sat beside his bed, her small hand holding his larger one. Her clear voice rose in prayer. "Please God, don't take him from us, we need him." Then she began to sing their hymn, the melody washing over him like cool water. Harlan squeezed her hand weakly as the familiar words filled the cabin, carrying him into a more peaceful sleep. Dawn crept through the frosted windows, painting weak shadows across Harlan's pale face. His fever still burned hot, and his injured leg lay useless beneath the quilts. When he tried to push himself up, his arms trembled like autumn leaves before giving out completely. "Don't try to move," Clara said softly, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You need rest." The toddler, Sarah, clutched her rag doll and watched from the corner with worried eyes. Matthew, the oldest boy at 9 years old, shouldered the responsibility that morning. "We got no choice, Clara. The woodpile's almost gone, and we need food." He grabbed the worn leather game bag and motioned to his 7-year-old brother John. "We can check Pa's rabbit snares too." Harlan's voice came out raspy and weak. "Too dangerous, the snow." "We know the way now," Matthew insisted, pulling on his threadbare coat. "You showed us good, Pa. John and me can handle it." The boy's determination shone in his eyes, even as fear flickered beneath the surface. Clara wrapped extra scarves around both brothers' necks. "Be careful, come straight back if the weather turns." She pressed their mother's old compass into Matthew's mittened hand. The boys nodded solemnly before heading out with the wooden sled, the door closing behind them with a hollow thud. The hours crawled by like molasses. Clara kept her vigil by Harlan's bedside, humming softly as she changed the cool cloths on his forehead. Sarah toddled over periodically, patting Harlan's hand with her chubby fingers. "Papa's sick," she would say, her bottom lip trembling. During a moment of clarity, Harlan's eyes focused on Clara as she rocked Sarah in the carved wooden chair. "You're so much like her," he whispered. "Like who?" Clara asked, continuing the gentle rocking motion. "My Rebecca." His voice grew thick with memory, strong when she needed to be, gentle with everyone, never lost her faith, even when times were hard. He closed his eyes, fighting emotion. "She would have loved you children." Clara's own eyes glistened. "Tell me more about her." "She could sing like an angel, just like you. Had that same quiet way of taking care of folks." His rough hand found Clara's. "The Lord took her from me, but maybe he knew what he was doing after all, sending you four to me." The door burst open then, letting in a blast of cold air along with two very wet but triumphant boys. Matthew held up a plump rabbit while John dragged in a sled full of firewood. Snow melted from their red cheeks as they grinned. "Look what we got, Pa," John exclaimed. "Matthew remembered exactly where you put the snares." Clara quickly got to work, showing her brothers how to prepare the rabbit the way Harlan had taught her. Soon, the cabin filled with the hearty smell of rabbit stew. They gathered around Harlan's bed, sharing bowls of the steaming broth, a family whole once more. The mountain winter was slowly loosening its grip as February melted into March. Inside the snug cabin, Harlan sat propped up in his bed, his injured leg stretched out before him. Though the wound was healing, stiffness remained, making each movement a careful consideration. "Mind that fire, Matthew," he called out, watching the oldest boy add another log. The flames danced higher, warming the cabin's weathered walls. Afternoon light filtered through the windows, catching dust motes that sparkled like tiny stars. Harlan's eyes fell on the leather-bound Bible sitting on the shelf, untouched for years. Something tugged at his heart, a memory of Rebecca reading by lamplight, her voice soft and sure. "Clara," he called, "bring that book down, would you?" Clara reached up carefully, handling the Bible like it was made of glass. The spine crackled as she opened it, years of dust rising in a small cloud. "Time you children learned your letters proper," Harlan said, his voice gruff but gentle. He patted the edge of his bed, and all 4 children gathered close. Sarah, the toddler, crawled right up next to him, her small hand patting his arm. I know some," Clara admitted, tracing the faded gold letters on the cover. "Mama taught me a little, before." Harlan nodded, understanding the weight of those unspoken words. "Well then, let's start with what you know." Clara's finger moved slowly across the page, her brow furrowed in concentration. "In the begin," she stumbled, cheeks flushing pink. "Beginning." Harlan helped softly. "Take your time, child. No rush here." As Clara worked through the words, Harlan felt something shift inside his chest. The Bible's pages held Rebecca's careful notes in the margins, little hearts drawn next to her favorite verses. Once, these reminders of her had been too painful to bear. Now, sharing them with these children felt right, like breathing life back into long silent memories. The boys fidgeted but listened, and even little Sarah seemed transfixed by the rhythm of the words. When Clara successfully read a full verse, her face lit up with pride. Looking around his cabin, Harlan realized how different it felt now. Where once empty corners had echoed with loss, now they rang with children's whispers and shuffling feet. The walls that had held his grief now contained something new, hope, perhaps, or love. His hand went to his pocket, where Rebecca's silver locket had rested for years. He'd never been able to open it after her passing, but now, "Clara," he said softly, "come here a moment." She approached, curious. Harlan held up the delicate chain, the heart-shaped locket catching the firelight. "This was Rebecca's, your ma now, in a way." His fingers trembled slightly as he fastened it around Clara's neck. "She'd want you to have it." Clara touched the locket gently, tears welling in her eyes. The moment felt sacred somehow, like a bridge between past and present, between loss and new beginnings. The wagon creaked down the muddy main street of town, winter's grip finally loosening its hold. Harlan sat straighter despite his stiff leg. The children cleaned up and properly dressed beside him. Clara held little Sarah on her lap while the boys, Matthew and James, sat proud and alert. Townsfolk gathered on the wooden sidewalks, whispering behind raised hands. "Look at old Briggs, playing father," one woman muttered. "Those orphans'll break his heart or his bank, mark my words." Miss Etta stepped out of her store, her gray hair neat under her bonnet. "I see God's grace at work," she announced loudly, hands on her hips. "Those children are thriving, and Harlan Briggs is a changed man. Anyone with eyes can see it." The drunk who'd grabbed Clara months ago slouched against the saloon wall. "Ain't natural," he slurred. "Man like him taking in strays." Before Harlan could react, 3 townsmen stepped between the drunk and the wagon. "That's enough out of you, Tom," one said firmly. "The Briggs family deserves respect." Clara's chin lifted. "We're a family now," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "God brought us together." The words rang across the street, and Harlan felt his chest swell with pride. Even the most hardened gossips fell silent, seeing the truth in the girl's face. Inside Miss Etta's store, Harlan laid coins on the counter. "Need some fabric for new clothes," he said. "And maybe." His eyes strayed to the shelf of toys. Miss Etta smiled knowingly, wrapping up a wooden horse and a rag doll. The children's eyes grew wide as Harlan handed them their first real toys. His weathered face cracked into a genuine smile, the first in years, as their joy filled the store. Spring crept into the mountains like a gentle whisper. Patches of green grass emerged from beneath melting snow, dotting the meadow near Harlan's cabin with new life. The children ran through the damp grass, their laughter echoing against the mountainside. Inside the cabin, Harlan worked steadily with his tools, carefully fitting together pieces of pine to create a larger table. "Need room for everyone," he muttered, a smile tugging at his weathered face. The old table had served him well in his solitary years, but now it was too small for their family meals. In the newly thawed earth beside the cabin, Clara knelt in the dirt, her hands carefully placing seeds in neat rows. "These will be carrots," she explained to little Sarah, who watched with wide eyes. "And over here, we'll have beans climbing up strings." Her face glowed with hope as she imagined summer harvests. Matthew and James worked alongside Harlan, their small hands growing stronger as they helped mend the winter-damaged fences. They carried armloads of wood, proud of their contributions. "Look how much we can carry now, Pa," they called out, no longer hesitant to use the name. The cabin that had once echoed with lonely silence now rang with the sounds of life. Boots on floorboards, children's chatter, and the clatter of dishes at mealtimes. Harlan found himself smiling more, the weight of grief lifting from his shoulders. As the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara's voice rose clear and sweet, singing the familiar hymn. This time, Harlan's deep voice joined in naturally, their harmony floating across the meadow. The broken notes that had once caught in his throat now flowed freely, whole and healing. The small wooden church glowed in the early morning sunlight as Harlan guided his wagon into town. Easter Sunday brought out everyone's finest clothes, and he had made sure the children were presentable. Clara wore a new calico dress, her mother's locket gleaming at her throat. The boys fidgeted in their clean shirts, while little Sarah clutched a small bunch of wildflowers. As they walked up the church steps, whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. But these weren't the cruel murmurs of months past. There was something different in their tone now. Miss Etta smiled warmly from her pew, making room for them to sit. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden floors. Pastor Williams stood at the pulpit, his Bible open before him. His prayer rang clear through the quiet church. "Lord, we thank you for families formed by your mercy, not just by blood, but by your divine grace, for bringing lonely hearts together and healing broken spirits." When it came time for the special music, Clara walked to the front. Her clear voice filled the church with the familiar hymn, Arco Beaver, the same one that had first connected her to Harlan. As she sang, tears gleamed in the congregation's eyes. Even the hardest hearts softened at the pure faith in her young voice. Harlan couldn't stay seated. Something stirred in his soul, pushing him to his feet. "These children," he declared, his voice rough with emotion, "they're mine now, not by birth, but by choice, by God's grace." He knew what he was doing when he brought them to me. The congregation murmured in agreement, heads nodding. The town's acceptance wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Back at their mountain cabin, the family gathered around the new pine table, its surface gleaming in the afternoon light. Harlan looked at each face, Clara's gentle smile, the boy's bright eyes, little Sarah's innocent trust. He bowed his head, words of gratitude flowing freely now. "Thank you, Lord, for second chances, for bringing life back to this home." Clara's voice rose once more in the familiar hymn, but now it carried a different weight. No longer was it a melody of loss and longing. It had transformed into a song of pure joy, of family found and faith restored. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.